Are there other means to gain knowledge than the scientific method? I just came across Ian Hutchinson, a plasma physicist at MIT. He just wrote a book about what he calls scientism and the monopolizing of knowledge by science. And he wants to open a door for other means to acquire knowledge, not just through science. This appeals to me, not just intellectually, but also it applies to the hedge fund business. Are there other ways to acquire knowledge than the scientific method? This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. It's August 11th, and the fund is down since the last update around 10%. The market is down about 1%. The last update was August 7th. It's a Tuesday today. So we are, for the year, up 112%. The market's up 3%. We're outperforming by 109%. So we gave up about 10% in outperformance in the last couple of days. There is a few things happening in the market. I think the risk-off trade, as the market players call it, which is a rotation away from high growth stocks into more cyclical stocks. We had a rise in yields. We had a decline in gold. So the market starts to price some economic growth here, and that's a good thing. So I think we're not concerned. This rotation is normal. We had a very extreme case of money allocation into growth stocks. But in the end, these stocks will retain their values and even grow much more valuable than they were in the last few weeks. And I think underpinned by economic growth, that's even going to be better for stocks like Tesla or Microsoft. So we're not concerned at all, and we take this rotation as a normal daily, weekly volatility that our fund is exposed to. Just to remind the listeners, the purpose of this podcast is to give people a feel for what it's like to run a hedge fund. And these are the kinds of days you also will encounter very often, which is some rotation for good news, actually. We have a decline in bond prices, so a rise in yields. We have a rise in things like the Dow Jones industrial stocks. There is pricing of economic growth creeping back into the market. And that is hurting some stocks like Tesla, which were priced off because they're very high growth stocks, more like risk assets that don't depend on general economic growth. Now, of course, Tesla also depends on economic growth. And if we had economic stagnation for the next 5 years, I doubt that Tesla can grow 30 to 40% CAGR, no matter how much disruption they cause to their markets. Nevertheless, I think having some economic growth actually helps the company. And we're very confident that this recent pricing in the market is actually good news. And even though it is costing us relative outperformance, this is, like it says, it's a relative outperformance. So we are now losing a little bit of ground relative to the rest of the market, and that's fine. That's fine. That is absolutely calculable. Now let's get to Ian Hutchinson. Are there other means to acquire knowledge than science? Let's unpack that. The name of this podcast, Not Even Wrong, goes back to Wolfgang Pauli and his statements of he sarcastically often would say to physicists that they're not even wrong because their statements are not even based on some sound theory. And I think the fundamental approach that Pauli and his peers were pushing was the scientific method. And the scientific method requires brutal empiricism based on theories that might not be empirical, but those theories then have to be tested in brutal, empirical, data-driven experiments. So you come up with an idea, and then you test it in the real world. You get the data back, you adjust the idea. You don't hallucinate. You don't come up with ideas that are not grounded in reality. Some of the criticisms, like string theory, for example, it was criticized because it was so above testable reality that no matter how beautiful it looked, it just didn't convince people. So Ian Hutchinson in his book writes about scientism and the monopolization of knowledge by science, and of course he is making the point that is not a good thing. that there are other avenues to acquire knowledge and that they can be combined. Ian is a devout Christian, so he's opening the door for things like spirituality, narratives, like the Bible, for example. And I don't want to now discuss religion here at all. It's completely irrelevant to me what those avenues could be. But the question I find is very interesting, which is, all right, look, we're a hedge fund. We're trying to use, it's certainly not the scientific method that they're using at Caltech when they're doing particle physics, but we're trying to use something very similar. And most importantly, we're trying to have a North Star, which is, listen, whatever we do, it has to be grounded in a thesis which is backed by a theory, which is backed by data. And therefore, we can earn the right to be right or wrong. And this is the idea of the name of the podcast and the underlying principle of our fund. And of course, that's a good thing. I think it has served us well in the last 8 years since foundation. We have CAGR'd mid double digits, which is extremely good for any hedge fund, particularly in the times since 2008 when we got founded. But let's keep an open mind. Let's see if there are other avenues of acquiring knowledge. This is the key question of this episode. And let's start with the definition of knowledge. Facts, information, and skills acquired by a person through experience or education, the theoretical or practical understanding of a subject. So the definition implies facts, information, skills. Those are things that to me seem very scientifically. So you can't have facts without using some sort of scientific method. Information is a little bit more general, and skills are methods to get things done, which are based usually on facts and information. But that's what knowledge is as defined by Google. And I don't know where they're taking it from, but I'm sure it's, it's from Oxford Languages. So that is the acquisition of knowledge through the scientific method makes a lot of sense. You acquire facts because in the scientific method, you are doing empirical studies by observing some natural phenomenon. So you gather facts. Information is the relationship of those facts. So the difference between facts and information in my world is if I have a fact is that my car drives with a battery. The information is it's driven by a lithium-ion battery that it has a certain efficiency and can last this long in the desert under air condition and strong heat, and therefore needs to be recharged, etc. That would be the information. The facts would be more what we maybe call the specs of a car, and etc. So, and skills, the skills are something that somebody acquires through acquisition of facts and information. Overall, somebody gets skillful. If you do experiments in quantum physics, you get more skilled in dealing with quantum particles, and you get better at avoiding problems, making mistakes, and achieving your goals. And now the question that Ian puts out there is, well, are there other means to acquire knowledge? Let's get back to knowledge. Why do we need knowledge for? Well, what is it useful for? Well, it's obviously useful to support a thesis or to even develop a thesis. Investing money is not a random process. You have to be able to formulate a thesis and then invest accordingly and stay invested when things are tough. For that, you do need facts, information, and skills. Why do you need facts? Well, you need to know that if you want to invest in an electric car company because you want to have a large impact with your fund on the advent of sustainable energy, if that's what you're looking for, then you need to find a company like Tesla, which, and this is a fact, has cars that are different, that are not depending on fossil fuels when they drive, and that are also able to access the market and win market share. Those are facts. Information, you need to have information, for example, in a sense, well, what is the outlook for a company like Tesla in terms of building new factories? Can you find ways to maybe can you find ways to gauge how fast they can grow based on the cost and the time required to build new factories. This is information you need to gather, which supports your thesis. The skills as a hedge fund, of course, you need to have the skill to do all these things. That it sounds very easy, but how do you actually acquire information? It's a skill to talk to companies. It's a skill to even find the right people to talk to. It's also a skill to trade in the markets. It's a skill to use the right financial assets in certain situations. Sometimes options are better than stocks, and sometimes maybe the debt market is interesting, or at least you can use the debt market to price your equity or your options off the debt market. So there are skills involved. It's not just opening an account with Schwab and pressing the buy button. This is certainly not the case in the hedge fund business. So it's much more than that. So now, are there other avenues? Are there other avenues? And I want to. This is not something I prepared for. I can't come up now with like 5 bullet points or something like that. I'm thinking first and foremost there is instinct. Instinct is something we always say. Oh, it's my gut feeling. And the point with instinct, in my view, it's not very different than the scientific method. Instinct is simply the knowledge we have which hasn't been processed by our frontal cortex yet. So it's still the same kind of facts, information, skills. It's just we're not aware of it. So it's kind of our subconscious thinking that we process through our experience that turns into what we call instinct and makes us make decision based on that. So therefore, I wouldn't count instinct as another avenue of knowledge acquisition. So what else is out there? I think spirituality. I want to open the door for that, and here's why. I think sometimes, let's say when we just traveled to Salt Lake City, and while it was completely random, we didn't go there to learn something for our fund. We learned a ton. And the reason we did that is, I think, because there are things like serendipity or even faith or fate, maybe not faith, that's the wrong word, fate, that we were there at the right time, the right place. They had an ozone problem. We spoke with a few locals. They told us, well, we have an ozone problem. Then we told them, well, why don't you drive more electric cars? And a small conversation in a gondola, going down from Alta after we hiked up there, turns into a very, very interesting topic, which is, why is Utah resisting renewable energies? Turns out that one of their largest companies and a lot of their industries are tied to the refining and chemical processing industry, and they are just holding up this whole process. And I feel like this is knowledge that we acquired not through the scientific method. You might call it serendipity or coincidence. Some people say there's no such thing as coincidence and serendipity. It's just you're prepared because you work hard. You're always prepared to strike at the right time. And this was one of those because you've done all the reading and the interviews and the talks and the preparation for this moment in that gondola. When you weren't even thinking about it, you were able to extract very valuable knowledge out of these people just because you were well prepared. So in the end, it's still the scientific method. And I don't want to argue like that, because then you can say everything is scientific. God is just another way to scientifically define how nature works or something like that. I don't want to go down that route. I want to be very specific, and I want to use pool, the game of pool, as an analogy here. You see, in pool, it only counts if you predict how the balls will fall. And I did not predict that I'm going to go to Salt Lake City and extract knowledge from locals in a gondola. So it happened through serendipity. And therefore, I think there is an open door for acquisition of knowledge through serendipity, through fate. And I think it makes me, as a hedge fund manager, work even harder, do the right things, because I expect such moments to come every now and then and give me some guidance in how to pursue. Like this experience, for example, in Salt Lake City, cemented my thoughts and my ideas about Tesla. I'm even a much, much bigger proponent of Tesla, and I recommend anybody. I recently recommended one of our customers to increase their positions, simply because I have more conviction now in our thought and our thesis based on that conversation. So this is a small anecdote relying on nothing more than just anecdotal evidence, but I think it ties into Ian Hutchinson's thesis that we are not just data processing, scientific method acquiring machines. There is more to it, and we are at Orange Capital Partners, we're open for those avenues because they end up cementing our path, helping us get to our goals, and they're helping us do that in a way that makes us feel more comfortable. And that's very important. Thank you.